Hi, and thank you all for watching our 25 Lessons in Leadership series for Association Laboratory's 25th anniversary. I'm Nikki Golden, a strategist at Association Laboratory, and I have with me Pam Watts, who's the Executive Director of NIRSA. Pam, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, these have been such great conversations with just so many different perspectives. So I'm very anxious to hear yours.
Mhm.
And as we kind of talked about beforehand, one of the places I find most interesting is just kind of where everybody comes into the
Mhm.
association space from. And so you have been with NIRSA, it looks like about almost 17 years.
Mhm.
But prior to that, you weren't working in associations.
Mhm.
So tell us how you got involved in associations and then your kind of life with NIRSA, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have an accounting degree. I went to college to be an accountant. I worked at waste management for a couple of years and then made the shift to public accounting for a regional firm in the Seattle area. I think the best part about at that time, I think it was the Big Six. This was a few years ago. Um, was that in a smaller firm, I got to do a little bit of everything. And one of the
Mhm.
most powerful experiences I think of public accounting is you get exposed to so many different businesses. So I worked on client jobs with, for-profits, nonprofits, family-owned businesses, small ones, medium ones, a little bit larger ones, and really got a breadth of experience. And then, like all good CPAs, I went to work for a client. That happened to be a family-owned business that ran parking lots up and down the West Coast, but they had amassed so much other real estate and rental property, they ran their own property management company. So I did that for a couple of years. And then when my husband and I moved to Eugene for him to go to grad school at U of O, I was looking for a controller CFO job and NIRSA was hiring. And I almost didn't apply because at that point I was going to be the sole wage earner for my family. And I thought, oh, it's a nonprofit, like it's not going to be able to, pay
Yeah.
enough. But I applied anyway and got the job. And I was the CFO, which was kind of the only number two position at the time, for a couple years. Then I left for 5 years because I had a couple kids and stayed home with them, and then came back again into number two positions for about 5 years. And then when my executive director, who I worked for, stepped down at the end of 2011, the board asked me to serve as executive director in 2012, and I've been doing it ever since. So I
How
still,
exciting.
my background in accounting, I still understand organizations through the numbers, right? That's what makes sense to me. I know that language. And I think that's been a help.
Yeah. And NIRSA, I would say, is an association that you can't necessarily tell from its acronym what it is because you don't
Yeah,
really use a full words
right,
to fill out that
right.
acronym. So who's part
Who's
of
NIRSA?
NIRSA? Yeah.
Yeah. So NIRSA is the Association for Campus Recreation. Our members are on 900 college and university campuses across North America. It's the folks working in the rec center. So they're doing all of the non-varsity sport, fitness programs, outdoor programs, health and well-being programs, etc. So it's really, athletics takes care of varsity and we take care of everything else.
Yeah. And it's full disclosure here, you are a client. We just did
Mhm.
a strategic planning
Yeah.
project for you. So, I think about your members and your association are kind of both at that crossroads here as we kind of look to
Mhm.
the future. And so, thinking about projecting in 20 years and looking back at today, what do you think would be the most startling change we'd see in association leadership?
And the leadership skills themselves. Yeah, I think
Yeah, and that's skills or, how kind of associations are being led,
mhm,
who's
mhm,
leading them, and,
mhm,
whatever. We don't have
mhm.
a specific test for this.
Well, we're definitely in, like a generational shift in who sort of the leaders within the field are, right? And so they're bringing different expectations, different ideas, different lived experience to the association, and honestly, that's exciting, especially for someone as long tenured as me to bring new energy, new ideas, all of that. I think for associations and other organizations, the commitment to EDI, the expectation to comment on social issues and other issues going on in your space, whether that's US or global, is not going away. And so I think you need some competency around that. I think you need some systems around that. I think cultural competency, emotional intelligence is more important than ever before. And it's
Yeah.
not that it was, absent pre-COVID, but I feel like anyone who wasn't sure, maybe we're hanging on to some hierarchical, command and control models, that's not going to fly. That's not going to fly anymore.
Yeah,
Mm.
that is so true. And I think just, there's just a different feeling in the air, um, in work in general, just of
Mm-hmm.
who who you are and where that separation is between like your
Mm-hmm.
work self and your personal self has seemed
Mm-hmm.
to been erased, which is
Mm-hmm.
such a great thing because, you don't have to wear so many different kind of
Right.
personalities,
Right.
when you could just be your full self, in
Well,
the
and
workplace.
we ask our employees, our staff to bring their full selves to work, right? We want all of their energy and creativity and, lived experience. And in return, that means we need to take care of the whole person. So we
Yeah.
can't be asking for it on one end and then behave like our policies and benefits and everything else, have a much more narrow scope, which is where I think we were 10 and 20 years ago.
Yeah, I would agree. So association laboratory sector research has identified a couple of big shifts that I think we were starting to see, but everybody kind of, hoped they would go away. But then, COVID came about and it really eliminated those boundaries for information, for
Mhm,
money, competency by technology, and this
mhm,
increasing competition, from for-profit organizations. So, the traditional association model is really being disrupted.
mhm.
What is the most significant existential threat to association leadership, and how do you think it could be turned into an opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys are naming the right things, right? And particularly, this idea of like eliminating boundaries, right? There's so much that folks can access easily and for free, on their own. So I think associations really need to focus on going deep, going into complex problems, complex information, and generally speaking, at least in the US, people don't trust institutions anymore. They don't trust government. They don't trust they don't trust their place of employment. They don't trust their churches, right? There's very few places that we trust anymore. And I think, associations have an opportunity to rebuild trust, right? To say, no, you know, we are your trusted source of information. Starting
Mhm.
with, we don't have a profit motivation. I mean, yes, we have to make money to survive, but any money we make gets plowed back into the industry we represent, right?
Right.
Gets plowed back into the association. This isn't for the benefit of shareholders or other owners. And I think associations have an opportunity to leverage AI to take care of some of the administrivia, the routine things. And I think we're going to see that at a level like we almost can't even imagine at this point, which
Mhm.
really means then our resources, whether it's member dues or, the other pathways of money, can really go deep into member value. And it is going to be building that trust. It is going to be helping them solve really complex problems. Because I'm certainly seeing that in our industry, and I'm sure it's not different for those in other industries. Life's not going to get easier. This whole
No,
space we're in isn't going to simplify magically in a few years.
and I'm a huge proponent of associations as a convening body, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
probably
Mm-hmm.
one of the ways in which associations started,
Mm-hmm.
but that we've really kind of moved away from that. But
Mm-hmm.
bringing all the stakeholders together to really discuss,
Mm-hmm.
what those big problems are and how to possibly tackle them is just,
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's the power of that community, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
everybody can funnel that passion they have for the work that they do into making it easier, making it
Mm-hmm.
more inviting, making
Mm-hmm.
it, less of a regulatory hazard or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that issue is. And I think that's way underutilized by
Mm-hmm.
associations. Love
Mm-hmm.
that. Love that
Well,
thought process.
and the other thing I think associations do really well is curate content. And while
Yes.
on the one hand, folks can go get content on their own in a lot of ways, but it's largely uncurated, or it's
And
curated
it's such a
maybe by,
barrage.
yeah, or curated by people like, well, do you trust them? What's their
Yeah. Yeah.
motivation in this? So I think that content curation, going back to trust, is also like the thing we need to hang on to and do more and more and more of, and then
Yeah.
promote that we're doing it.
Yeah. And I think really along with that content creation or content curation
Mhm.
is really helping them draw the lines
Mhm.
between like why this matters and
Mhm.
how it's going to impact your job or
Mhm.
how it's
Mhm.
going to impact the industry or how it's going to
Mhm.
impact whatever within. Because sometimes you kind of read something and like, no, like this feels important, but I'm not really sure what to do with it. And kind
Mhm.
of helping them draw those lines, I think is a really great role too with that content
I
curation.
mean, Nikki, that's key. Like there's so many things that you care about that you
Right.
could put your energy towards, fixing or advancing or, what have you. I mean, my college age kids talk about this all the time, right? To them, like there's so many problems in the world to solve. And sometimes it's hard to pick, well, where can I have the most impact? Because it's not a choice of like, what do I care about the most?
Right. Yeah.
They care about it all.
Yeah.
But it's where can I have impact and what's the pathway to do that?
Yeah. Prioritization, always the hardest stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as we kind of look to that future and these opportunities that are out there, what do you think is the leadership trait that you think will become obsolete in the future?
hmm
And what emerging trait should replace it within association
hmm
leadership?
Yeah. I mean, I think if there's any command and control, hierarchical, structures out there, leaders who thrive in those kind of structures, like they're gone. If you're hanging on to those, you're driving your organization into the ground. And even when I think about some of the more traditional like board and committee and all of those structures, not to mention like roles and responsibilities, between leaders. I have to champion this book called New Power. I'm looking at it.
Mm,
It's from Jeremy Hymans and Henry Timms. Um, and they talk a lot in there about movements, right? And how do you lead something that's a movement? So everything from the ALS challenge, right? Where there was this idea and then it took
yeah,
off. And it was
yeah.
completely, beyond the organization. How do you channel your members into movements? How do you let go of enough control so they can take it and make it their own and make it make sense in their context, especially for those of us running national or international associations, that balance between local and global or
Hmm.
local and national. You so that takes a different leadership skill, right? To be comfortable in that, to harness the energy of that, to be skilled at that. It takes incredible
And to build the
transparency.
enthusiasm for that,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
that because that does take kind of member enthusiasm to participate and to really
Yeah.
be those cheerleaders and ambassadors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that could, associations could channel that. Those leadership traits could be used going forward to really create change in, whatever industry you're in.
Yeah. I really like that. I've mostly worked at small staff associations.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that idea of just things happen from everywhere, it's
Mm-hmm.
never been particularly hierarchical
Mm-hmm.
because, there's just so few of
Can.
them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that idea of, everybody kind of not necessarily has a seat at the table, but understands that their ideas are just as valued, whether it comes
Mm-hmm.
from, somebody at a coordinator position
Mm-hmm.
versus somebody at C-suite position,
Mm-hmm.
is just so important because that just
Yeah.
keeps everybody interested too.
Yeah.
And I think for some of those people who are maybe at lower levels within the organization, they hear from a different subset of
Mm-hmm.
people
Mm-hmm.
than as you move into the director level,
Mm-hmm.
C-suite, et cetera. And so, I think that they just have a very different perspective of what's actually happening with the association, with the industry, and with the people who are, kind of contacting the organization.
Yeah, one of the blessings of remote work and we all used to be in Oregon together and now about 2/3 of the staff is outside of Oregon. And and our members are all across the country, sitting at
Yeah.
colleges and universities. And so staff have been able to go visit members at local universities, right? So
Oh,
it
cool.
used
Yeah.
to be when you want to go out and, talk to your members or even have a
Mhm.
larger group, I mean, you had to find money to put them on planes and, stay in hotels and all of that. And we've said this forever in associations, you have to get beyond your leadership because your leadership is you're highly engaged, they're in a certain stream of information, right? It's a good perspective, it's just not the only perspective. And yeah, so that opportunity with your remote workforce to get out and just see members day to day, see the members who aren't highly engaged, the ones that, they're members, they come to your conference, maybe they participate in your listserv, like that's it, they're good. They're not doing a committee, they're not going to be on the board. But
Yeah.
hearing from them really helps us stay relevant and build those relationships in a way that now doesn't cost, everyone $1,500 to get on a plane, stay in a hotel, and be away from their family.
That's such a great idea. When my original career path was publishing. And
Mm,
so when I worked at some trade magazines, we would shadow, some of our
mhm,
readers just to kind of
mhm,
have a better perspective of, what their day-to-day challenges were. So
yeah,
we can kind of, pitch better articles and just
mhm,
have a different perspective. And, that was such a great experience, kind of understanding, like putting kind of the words that we're reading in all these magazine
mhm,
articles, like, and now seeing it in real life and understanding how all those things connect. And
mhm,
it is a different conversation when you are with somebody who is now experiencing an issue
mhm,
that they're trying to solve. And, the
mhm.
first place they look is definitely not their association,
Right,
but
right,
maybe it should be.
right.
And so be able to like say, oh, you know what, actually, we have a resource for this. Let me
Mhm,
show you.
mhm, mhm.
Is so powerful.
Yeah, because I
Excuse me.
mean all the marketing and promotions and coming out of the, national office or national virtual office, like, that'll get you some traction. Some folks will read that, but it is
Right.
like you said, some folks it's like, that's part of that, get them the information in the moment that they need it.
Yeah.
And, showing
Or
up at
even
the,
understand like, hey, this has been a problem that I've now, talked to three
mhm.
different
Yes,
random
yes,
members, and
yes.
I don't think we have anything for this. Is this
Mm-hmm.
something we should address?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of
100%.
back and forth information is great.
Yeah.
I love that you're doing that.
Yeah. Staff loves it
Um,
too.
yeah. And I think this kind of flows nicely into kind of this next question, which I feel like we've kind of delved into a little bit, but how do you see the balance shifting between that need for kind of strong individual leadership and that collaborative, decentralized decision making in the future?
Yeah, I mean it's going to continue to shift towards the collaborative like we've talked about, and that takes a different leadership skill set. And again, where some of these traits and characteristics have been part of successful association executives in the past, like I think it just has to go on steroids, right? So, like we talk a lot internally about, if you're going to be successful at NIRSA or in an association, you have to be able to lead with influence. And so many people are used to being able to lead with authority, right?
Yeah.
Over a staff person, over a committee, over a project, whatever. And you have to be able to lead with influence. The other thing we talk about, and I have this, very bad sports analogy, that when we talk about teamwork, um, some people think teamwork is like being on a relay race, right? Where
Hmm.
where you have
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
really good handoff with the baton, right? And you are an excellent team if you can do those handoffs really, really, really well. And that certainly works in, some organizations, some structure. But I feel like in associations, and especially if you're trying to co-create with your members and really pay attention and let them have influence over the outcome, it's more like soccer, right? Where everyone has a position and a role, but you also cover for one another and you
Yeah.
change. And
Yeah.
midfielders run forward and sometimes score, drop back on defense, or a wing will go way up the side. And that's what it feels like. And it's more integrated and collaborative, and you shift roles based on what you're doing at a moment in time.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about that in the hiring process, frankly, for staff at our association.
Because I think that definitely takes it it takes a different view of ownership,
Yeah.
right? Like, there's ownership where it's kind of like, oh, you're gonna change this thing, and but
Hmm.
I did it this way because, and
Hmm.
then there's ownership, like we all own it and we're all working together, and there's no pride in who put what
Hmm.
where. It's just, the the final product is the
Hmm.
critical thing, not
Is the
necessarily
win.
the pathway you took to get there. And
Yeah,
those are very
exactly.
different skill sets.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I'm curious, because you mentioned in the hiring process. So are you asking a specific type of question to kind of get at that? What type of how they view teamwork, or like how are you kind of getting at a person's view of teamwork in the interviewing process?
Yeah, we'll ask for examples, and I mean there's some tried and true things around, if they talk about an experience on a team, but it's all I statements versus we
Hmm.
statements,
Hmm.
especially in like senior leader positions, I'm always looking for those examples where they give credit to the team when it goes well and they take all the ownership when it doesn't, as the leader.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni and his hiring mantra of humble, hungry, and smart. And smart is not IQ smart, it's emotional intelligence, it's people
Hmm.
smart. And so
Hmm.
we have a series of questions that, we borrowed from him, that kind of get after those things because, you can train people like the nuts and bolts of their job, right? But,
Right.
you want humble because you don't want ego. You want hungry because you want drive. And then you want people to have a level of emotional intelligence and being open to, learning and growth. And, you know, I another thing I 100% believe in is the further up you go, of course, the wider your toolkit of the types of employees or volunteers in our case you can engage. So it's not,
Hmm.
I'm the leader, this is my style, you conform to me. It's no, I'm the leader. I've got multiple staff, I got multiple committees. I need to have a wide range of tools to engage different people differently
Yeah.
to bring
Yeah.
out their best work. And again,
Yeah.
I think, some of that in like, management leadership circles was going on pre-COVID. But it's no longer a luxury. Like that's just how it has to happen. That's the expectation.
Yeah, I think that there was knowledge that you have to be able to meet people where they were,
Hmm.
but I don't think there was that actual step of figuring out where they were so
Hmm.
you could meet them there.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
like just very much like,
Yeah.
if it organically happens, that's great, but
Yeah.
like if not,
Yeah.
And so now I think there's that separate action of like, okay, I need to stop and figure out like what does this person need? What
Hmm.
fuels this person? And then, kind of provide that leadership from that
Hmm.
standpoint.
Hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny how much that's evolved.
Yeah.
So, considering this rapid evolution of member needs and especially their expectations, how do you envision the role of association leaders in ensuring that relevance, value, and that sustainable growth as we look to the next decade?
Next decade. Well, my
I know.
crystal ball is broken and flawed, so let me just preface it with that. Um, uh, I mean, it really is just engaging through the generations. It's getting past your leadership, like we talked about earlier, to make sure you're talking to, boots on the ground members, not who just shows up in your committees and your leadership groups. Um, it feels a little odd to say that because, of course, we've had generational transition like forever, right? Like, why does this one feel different? I think it is different that we have 5 generations in the workplace. And I think that Gen Z in particular is demanding more, um, for a whole bunch of good reasons, frankly. And I think they have the tools that they're going to give us one shot at it. But if we don't meet their needs, they're going to move on and do it themselves because they have the tech tools, they have the ability to congregate, they have the ability to curate, some of these core association things. So, the good news is they'll give us a shot at it. The bad news is you better be listening, you better be paying attention. This is not about them conforming to what you did. I think we're going to have to think long and hard about our business models, right? Because often and I even do this, like the reaction when you listen to, younger folks in the field about their lives and their needs and, how they want their association to support them. Like the number, maybe it's just me because I was a former accountant. Like the numbers, you're like, how am I going to make that work financially? Right. So I'm not saying it's easy, but we're going to have to keep after it, right? About what those financial models look like.
Absolutely. I think, for just a couple things to touch on that you said, I think the difference in this generational shift is that previously we've all come from like the same place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now you have
Mm-hmm.
all these generations, people who didn't grow
Mm-hmm.
up with the internet,
Mm-hmm.
people who are kind of, starting school at the cusp of sort of being online, sort of not. It was
Mm-hmm.
pretty low tech, and then this couple generations where, they were born with like a phone in their
Yeah.
hand, and they're
Yeah.
so much more adept at figuring out what they want and need, and
Mm-hmm.
getting and just creating it, versus like
Mm-hmm.
those of us who are kind of in those other two groups who
Mm-hmm.
were like, yeah, still
Mm-hmm.
like kind of like I feel like I'm comfortable, but there are
Mm-hmm.
definitely times where I'm like, oh, maybe I'm not as comfortable as I think of trying to figure this out.
Right.
So
Right.
I think that is kind of that difference. And that speaks to I think something you were talking about with the financial modeling is I think a lot about how often, we look at everything through a membership lens.
Mm-hmm.
And from their standpoint, if I want to learn, or I want to attend something, or I want to read something, like,
Mm-hmm.
why do I have to be a member? I
Mm-hmm.
think before
Mm-hmm.
it was just kind of like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it no
Mm-hmm.
longer makes sense.
Right.
I think all of these like barriers to
Right.
participate that
Right.
associations have put up just because, or because it's part of our, governance
Mm-hmm.
structure, or
Mm-hmm.
like that's no longer acceptable
Mm-hmm.
for a huge swath of the
Mm-hmm.
population. And so if we don't have a real great answer as to
Mm-hmm.
why it's so freaking hard to like
Mm-hmm.
participate, then I
Yeah.
think you're right. Like they're just like, nobody has the patience for that.
Yeah, and
And
it's that shift of like, what are you going to put out there for free for the industry to attract them and to build yourself up as the thought
mhm,
leader, the trusted source,
right.
the curated content, all of those things that we talked about. And then what, do you have to charge for? Because,
Yeah.
all of that costs money. And honestly, like the meetings industry is not helping us right now because where we used to
Yeah.
make pretty good margin on in-person meetings, we're just not, and I think that margin, like costs are going up, but there's only so much we can increase the fees, which is getting really, really hard. So we're
Yeah.
going to have
Yeah.
to get outside of that model.
Yeah. Yeah. That, I mean, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of
Hmm.
opportunity, a lot.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, Pam, thank you so much for participating today. It was great to talk to you and kind of hear your thoughts on a lot of these exciting issues. And we hope that everyone will continue to tune in to our 25 lessons in leadership. And we will see you on the next one.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me and happy anniversary. 25 years. That's amazing. That's
Thank
amazing.
you. It is amazing. It's exciting.